And, if we're honest, probably everybody in this room, we have heard at least a sermon or two. I always think of, I don't mean to pick on TV evangelists, but I can think of 2 or 3 that I watch periodically just because, well, I don't know. Don't teach like that, Chris. But anyway, they sow your seeds, and and they overblow, overstate what this principle really means. But the reality is, even if maybe some of the teaching that we've had in the past, maybe it's not so solid, not as well biblically sound as it could be. The reality is, it doesn't change the principle. This principle was true in the first century, and it's still true now. The more we give, we're talking about giving you the things of God, the more God blesses us. That is a biblical principle, okay? And we can't deny that, okay? But in order for this principle to kick in order for God to follow through with the reward, I don't really like that word. I'm kind of uncomfortable with it, but I'm using it. But in order for God to reward our faithfulness, our generosity, our trustworthiness, we have to play by the rules, okay? There are some requirements for the principle that's stated in verse 6. There are some requirements for the principle to kick in. And we see the requirements in verse 7. We cannot skip verse 7. Here it is. Each man should give what he has decided in his heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. So the first part of that, he says each man should give what he has decided in his heart to give. And so this idea is that we have thought about it. Okay, it isn't a spontaneous decision to give. It isn't because it's an emotional moment. It isn't because of an appeal by a persuasive preacher. No, the idea here is we have decided in our heart to give. I've thought about this. I thought about how much money I have. I thought about the need that has been presented of the person or the organization. I thought about this. I prayed about it. I understand the biblical principles, and then you make a determined effort to give just what you have thought about. But I think the even more significant what we see here in terms of the playing by the rules is this giving cheerfully. We have to give cheerfully, don't we? God loves a cheerful giver. And so if I don't know if you can identify with this, but as the offering plate goes by, if you're sort of inside, you're thinking, man, I really hate this. Oh, it's offering time. And if offering time is just a totally negative experience, well, it's pretty safe to say you're probably not a cheerful giver. God loves a cheerful giver, okay? That is in connection, I believe, to our motives. We're not being forced to do this. We're not being tricked into giving. We've thought about it. We've prayed about it. And when that plate comes around, we are cheerfully putting in money, It's not, Chris has my arm trapped behind my back. No, it's not that at all. I thought about it. I prayed about it. I want to do this. I'm glad to do this. And so if we were to sort of sum up, what are the requirements for this great principle to kick in? Well, the requirements, I think, are pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Give thoughtfully and cheerfully. Give thoughtfully and cheerfully. Again, I really think the general thrust of verse 7 is your motives. That's what God is after, is why are you giving? If you're giving because the preacher's yelling and screaming that you need to give, you're probably not giving for the right reasons. And, it's cheerfully. As a matter of fact, it's very, very cool. The Greek word that is translated as cheerful, we get an English word from that term. And you know what English word we get from it? Hilarious. Hilarious. So think about that. The next time the offering plate comes around, God loves a hilarious giver. And so knowing that, to me, doesn't that tell us how important our motives are, how important our attitude is. Why are we giving? Or do we feel forced? Is it because everybody else is giving? Is it because, well, that's what I'm supposed to do? Are you doing it for a legalistic reason? No, God says, no, I don't want you to do that. I want you to think about it. I want you to pray about it. You understand how much money you have. You understand what the need is. You understand that God has expectations. You understand that giving the things of God is important. And when that offering time, that opportunity comes, you do it, and you're glad to do it. You do it cheerfully. Again, motives are huge here. Very cool principle, isn't it? The more we give, the more God blesses us. But that principle only applies to us. It only kicks in if we play by the rules. We have to give thoughtfully, and we have to give cheerfully. In other words, our motives have to be pure, okay? And so, but if that all is taking place, if we want to be generous, and we are generous, and we're doing it for the right reasons, we've thought about it, we're giving cheerfully, nobody's forcing us to do it, nobody's tricking us to do it, we're doing it willingly, then the blessing kicks in. Now, the blessing is in verses 8 to 11. But I think what we may find out for some of us, the blessing, how God sort of rewards us, it may not be exactly maybe what you have thought it was, okay? And we'll talk about that. Beginning in verse 8, here we come. Here's a blessing. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that in all things at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. As it is written, he has scattered abroad his gifts to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. Now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. You will be made rich in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion, and through us your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. Now, there's a lot in those verses, but for the sake of time and staying focused, I really want to focus on verse 8 in particular, okay? I think verse 8 is probably the key verse along with verse 11, okay? But in verse 8, there's this phrase. He begins by saying, he says, and God is able to make all grace abound to you. To make all grace abound to you. Now that's kind of a fancy, maybe kind of a churchy way of saying. I think that is a restatement of sorts of the principle itself. The more we give, the more God blesses us. God will bless you. All grace will abound to you. God's favor will be upon you. He will supply you with the financial resources that you need. Okay. All grace will abound to you. So very, very interesting. God will replenish the money, if you will. It's not exactly this, but the money goes out. I'm generous. I have the right motives. I turn around, and God replenishes some or all the money that I've just given away. Okay, but notice here, very, very important, and this is where maybe some preachers wouldn't even mention this, but it's not honest not to mention that phrase in verse 8, having all that you need. Having all that you need. It's huge. And circle the word need. It is not having all that you want. If you buy into maybe some of this false teaching out there that, hey, if you give the things of God, if you sow your seed, my friend, God's going to bless you. You're going to become a millionaire. God wants you to be healthy and wealthy and have a second house and 12 cars and wear fancy clothes. That is not what he's saying here. He's saying having all that you need. So God will send money our way. All grace will abound to us if we're generous. Okay, and our motives are right. We turn around, and all grace will abound to us. God will supply us. I take this in a pretty straightforward way. Material resources, okay? Money, if you will, perhaps. But it's for meeting my needs. It's not for meeting my wants. And there's a huge difference there, isn't there? Okay? And now,